Meet the Candidates meeting. I'm Sue Fleming. I'm a board member of the JRA, and I'd like to start first with our land acknowledgement. We recognize that we live, work, and play on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, which is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by the Treaty 13, the Toronto Purchase, which represents a sovereign relationship between the Mississaugas of the Credit with the Crown. We recognize the original caretakers of the land and the enduring presence of treaties that guide the relationships between nations and with the land for past, present, and future. We're here to work together to build a healthy, caring, and vibrant community where all people can thrive in the present and for generations to come. I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Mahima Madhava.
Thanks, Sue. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Meet the Candidates event organized and hosted by the Junction Residents Association. I'm Mahima. I've lived in the Junction for over 10 years now, and I'll be the moderator for this evening. And we just wanted to welcome all of our fellow Junction residents and constituents in the Parkdale-High Park riding. We want to thank you for taking time out of your days to come and listen to some of our candidates in our riding who are in our upcoming election on provincial election on June 2nd. So before I have the candidates introduce themselves, I just wanted to go over some of our general sort of rules and housekeeping for tonight's event. So as you probably noticed, as you entered into the Zoom meeting. This meeting is being recorded and it will be made available afterwards on the JRA website. Attendees, all of your mics will be muted for the during the session. But if you have any questions, we invite you to write the questions in the chat box that's located at the bottom of your of the Zoom screen. And then we will, during the question and answer period, we'll try to get through as many of the questions as we can. We have provided the candidates pre-selected community-sourced questions. There'll be 7 of them. And each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to these questions and to speak about their related policies and platforms. The order of responses will rotate between the candidates so that each candidate has an opportunity to speak first. At the end of the pre-selected questions portion, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And you can either ask follow-up questions or questions about topics that potentially have not been discussed. But we do ask that you enter the questions into the chat box. And as I mentioned earlier, we will do our best to respond to all of the questions, but just knowing that we will need to be considerate of time. So while in order to just sort of maintain time, because it is quite a a tight session that we have here, we will have flashcards that we will use to help candidates stay within their allotted time. Yellow will indicate 20 seconds remaining. And Victoria's holding up the yellow card there. And red will indicate that time is up. So we ask that everyone please maintain respectful discourse throughout the event. And without further ado, I would like to welcome give a warm welcome to our 3 candidates, 3 of our candidates in the Parkdale-High Park riding, who have agreed to come and answer questions from our community, and who will also be speaking and sharing their platforms. First, we have Karim Bardisi from the Liberal Party of Ontario. Say hi, Karim. Next, we have Butila Karpoche from the Ontario NDP. And finally, we have Patrick Macklem from the Green Party of Ontario. If we can start with Karim, please, and if you could just give just a quick 1 minute introduction of yourself to everybody.
Thank you, Mahima, and thanks to the JRA and to all of you for attending, and to the other candidates. Thanks for making the land acknowledgement. I'm covered by the same acknowledgement in the Roncesvalles Village area with you tonight, and knowing that the Junction and our riding has a rich Indigenous history and a rich history of Indigenous connections to the settler community. I am a teacher, a journalist, a policy leader, and a father and husband living in our community. Teaching and leading a leadership institute at Toronto Metropolitan University, motivated to run in this election by the experience of the pandemic of my students and many parents and others in our community who were left behind by the Ford government with everything from a lack of paid sick leave while jobs were getting more dangerous to classes that were too large and not safe. And I was motivated to bring my experience as a former policy director to 2 premiers, as well as a journalist, to help bring change to our riding as part of a new government that's going to act on the priorities of our community. And I'm looking forward to this discussion tonight.
Thanks, Karim. Next, we have Butila Karpoche from the NDP. Butila.
Thank you, Mahima. Hi, everyone. I'm Putila Karpoche. And let me just say, I love Parkdale-High Park, and it is why I am running to be re-elected as your MPP. It is here my family and I began to rebuild our lives in Canada, and why I always keep community at the heart of my work. Now, we've been through a lot together. Our healthcare system is in crisis. The cost of housing is out of control. Our schools are crumbling. Kids are not getting the support that they need. With Ford in power, it has meant that the government's priorities don't reflect the people's priorities. We've lost too much. Too many people have suffered. Too many seniors have died for things not to change. Ford has to go. But Del Duca sure isn't the answer. Ford made things worse for sure, but the problem started long before that. And Del Duca Liberals had 15 years and they let us down. They say all the right things, but then do all the wrong things. And so going back to how things were just isn't going to cut it. We need to start fixing the things that have been broken for far too long. And the NDP has a comprehensive, pragmatic plan that will work for you. And I look forward to sharing that with you this evening. Together, we can do this. And you can count on me to work hard every single day to fix the things that matters most, just the way I have done the last 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Butila. And finally, we have Patrick Macklem from the Green Party of Ontario. Patrick. Oh, Patrick, I think you might be muted still.
Here we go.
Oh, Patrick, you're still muted. Sorry.
Third time always works, I hope. My name is Patrick Macklem, and I am running as your Green Party representative in the upcoming provincial election in our riding. I have taught constitutional law and labor law and international human rights law at the University of Toronto for the last 30 odd years. And like some of you, I'm part of the Great Resignation. So I took early resignation. I would prefer to call it that as opposed to early retirement, and decided to run, I think probably for the similar reasons as Karim. That is, the last 2-3 years have been an extraordinary time. And thousands of people have died. The estimate in the United States is 1 million United States citizens have died because of the pandemic. And we've changed profoundly, all of us in different ways, and our world has changed profoundly in different ways. And the government and the dominant establishment parties haven't. And they keep sticking to old school pocketbook politics that really has a disconnect to what we need as a community. Childcare was a huge accomplishment by the federal NDP and the Liberals, and to be honest, the Conservative government in Ontario. But we need a lot more than childcare, and we can't rest on our laurels. I don't believe the political parties, with their top-down, the dominant ones, with their top-down approach to governance, have the flexibility and the awareness and the ability to listen and serve as representatives in this new world. I'm doing this. I've never wanted to be a politician. I've never been associated with a political party before. And if you were to elect me, I won't be a politician. I will be a representative. And I hope to explain what that means to you in the next hour or so. Thank you for coming, and I look forward to meeting most, if not all of you in person in the next few days.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you to all of our candidates. Next, we will be proceeding to the pre-selected questions portion of the evening. So again, we have 7 questions in total. These questions have been provided to the candidates ahead of time. They're pre-selected and community sourced, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to these questions and to speak to the related policies and platforms. And we're going to start with Kareem, and we'll have the order of responses will rotate with each question. Each candidate will be allowed to respond to each question. So we'll start with Kareem. And the first question that we have is, we hear a lot about plans to make housing more affordable for purchasers. What plans does your party have to make housing more affordable and secure for renters? And what are your policies related to rent control and rent evictions?
Thank you for the question. And this is, I'm sure all of us are hearing this every day at the doors and have been hearing this for a number of years. And the housing crisis, I think, touches different people who are differently situated differently in the riding, but it does touch everybody. Specifically with respect to renters, I just wanted to first pay tribute to the residents and activists, especially in the Parkdale area, who have been very busy drawing attention to some of the issues, and with different kinds of advocacy have been able to fight back on some of the unfair rent increases. I've sat in on some of the landlord-tenant tribunal hearings and seeing how that process is really stacked against renters. We need a partner, I believe, at Queen's Park that can work with the federal government on issues that relate to tenants and tenancy and affordable housing. So we believe, I think like some of the other parties, in preventing rent hikes by reinstating rent control in all buildings in Ontario, creating a clear path to ownership, expanding co-op and the different kinds of housing models that are available, ending exclusionary zoning so we can have triplexes up to 2 stories by right anywhere in the city, and that can sometimes be a minimum. Doing things that support renters, like dealing with the elevator access issues, which are an issue in some of the buildings in our riding, and moving aggressively to help accelerate the resolution of landlord-tenant disputes in a way that has more of the tenant's side. Too often, the decks are really stacked against tenants in our riding, in our province, and I believe that some of these policies, along with a stronger federal partner at Queen's Park, provincial partner at Queen's Park, can really start to realign the decks a little bit and fight the unfair rent increases, the rent evictions, and the other issues that are making things really difficult for tenants in our riding.
Thanks, Kareem. Next, Butila, if you can answer the same question, please.
Yes, thank you. Let me just begin by saying first that housing is a human right. Everyone deserves a stable, secure, affordable place to live. And that's the approach and principle that the NDP takes. Now, in our platform, we have many, many, many ways in which we can make housing more affordable for renters, from creating a new public agency to actually build new affordable non-market rental housing, supporting co-ops with seed funding, offering a portable housing benefit of $300 a month for low-income households so that rent is not eating up entire paychecks. All of that is in our platform. I ask you to look into this. I really want to get into the most important, I think, structural policy issue that needs fixing in our rent control laws. Of course, rent control needs to be expanded to every building, regardless of when it was built. That's a very simple, straightforward one. But the biggest loophole that exists in our rent control laws is the one that Mike Harris created, and it is the driving factor for skyrocketing rents, and that is called vacancy decontrol, which means that once a unit is vacant, rent control laws pretty much ceases to exist, and rents can be jacked up to however high they want, way above guideline increases. We've seen increases of $500, $600, $700, $800 more for the exact same unit. And this is what is pushing tenants out of their homes, especially tenants who have lived in their units for a longer period of time, seniors, people on fixed income. This is the loophole behind rent evictions. Ask any renter, housing advocate, expert, they will tell you, if you want to stop skyrocketing rents, if you want to effectively end bad faith rent eviction, this is the loophole that needs to be fixed. I tabled a bill in the House to fix this. Unfortunately, my bill was voted down. However, we are pushing forward on this. It's part of our housing platform. It's something that's urgently needed, and only the NDP will fix it because the Conservatives and Liberals did not fix it when they had the opportunity to do so, but also Ford and Del Duca did not commit to this really important fixing of the loophole in our rent control system in their platforms right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Patilla. And now Patrick. Patrick, if you could unmute yourself. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Mahima. Technology is not my strong point, clearly. I want to preface my answer to this question with a comment that I think will inform some of the answers to the other questions, and that is, I will, to the best of my ability, try to convey what the green policies are with respect to all these items. And as we all of the candidates know, there's a lot more to talk about than the time allotted for each topic. But my role as your representative will be to be the point person for implementing the policies that are designed and legislated and drawn up at Queen's Park. Whether the Greens are in power, or the NDP is in power, the Liberals are in power, or the Progressive Conservatives are in power. And so I really see my role as downloading and consulting and taking advantage of the various policies that are on the table in this election. In terms of, to the benefit of Parkdale and High Park, the riding. So it's a new kind of representation that I see. It's a kind of action-oriented representation as opposed to more of a political stance. In terms of housing, yes, the Green Party will reinstate rent controls on all units. It's going to extend financial support to over 300,000 Ontario households through a portable housing benefit. It's going to deal with above guideline rent increases. It's going to strengthen the Residential Tenancies Act to ensure that new buildings and existing buildings are up to speed in terms of repair. We're going to strengthen rules for rent evictions and bad faith evictions. And we're going to increase funding extensively for the Landlord and Tenant Board, which is stressed beyond its institutional capacity. We want to upload 50% of housing and shelter costs that's currently borne by the City of Toronto, and yet still allow Parkdale, High Park, and other municipal areas to control a lot of management of those institutions. We want to build 182 new permanently affordable community housing rental homes, including 60,000 permanent supportive homes. We want to renew 250,000 community housing rental homes over the next decade. We want to allow single-family dwellings to be divided into multiple condominiums. We've already heard this before, multiple units. We also want to change the landlord-tenant relationship so that tightening up against rent evictions doesn't bump up against the counter policy of allowing people in our neighborhood to rent out lane homes and rent out units in their own houses. So we need to manage that transition very carefully.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Sorry, you're a little over time. Thank you. We're just going to move on to the next question, and the Butila will be responding to this question first. Residents are concerned about the impacts of the climate crisis, from flooding to extreme weather, and protecting the green belt. What are your environmental priorities for the upcoming term?
Thanks. Of course, there's a lot to cover, so let me just jump right into it as much as I can in 2 minutes. So not only protect the green belt, but expand it to include the Paris Gold Moraine, the Curtis Creek headwaters, sensitive ecological areas, water that needs protected. We've highlighted this already, but stop Highway 413 and the Bradford bypass, not just Highway 413, but also the Bradford bypass. We know that Ford wants to build both. Del Duca wants to build the Bradford bypass. The bypass paves over protected greenbelt area called the Holland Marsh. If the Bradford bypass and the 413 gets built, that's damage that's done forever. It's irreversible. We want to create a provincial water strategy to review all water taking permits. So no multinational like Nestle are taking public water and bottling it up for private profit. Also, it creates way too much plastic waste. Speaking of waste, we want to ensure more producer responsible model of industry waste, really holding the waste diversion responsibility at the industry level to hold them accountable for the pollution. Speaking of pollution, oh my gosh, our province creates so much pollution by running dirty diesel trains through our neighborhood. I was part of the Clean Train campaign a decade ago when we were pushing the then Liberal government. Despite the science and the technology that was already available, I remember, we had dirty diesel trains going through, even though the minister at that time, who happens to be Del Duca, promising that trains would be electrified by 2018. It's 2022. I've tabled a bill at Queen's Park to finally begin to take the steps towards electrification. Also, in terms of flood water management, supporting local projects like the Humber Bay Naturalization and Recreation Plan to protect the waterfront that we have just south of the Parkdale and Swansea areas from flooding. Those water breakers were built 100 years ago. It's badly deteriorated, needs to be replaced. We need to protect the shoreline from erosion and loss. I don't have too much time, but I just want to say very quickly that I am proud to be among the 13 candidates from over 600 running across Ontario to be endorsed by GreenPAC for my climate and environmental leadership at Queen's Park. I also have tabled a bill and want to continue to push for an all-party select committee for climate action. Climate crisis is everyone's responsibility and we have to work together. And my last thing I want to say is something that's very close to my heart because I love working with youth, is that the NDP will create a youth climate corps. Young people will get paid opportunities to get hands-on skills to restore and enhance Ontario's natural landscapes. We know that youth are passionate about climate action. Let's give them a role in solving the climate crisis and taking care of our environment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Butila. Patrick, if you could respond to the same question, please. Oh, Patrick, you just need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. To answer your question, the Green Party has extensive plans to deal with high heat, extensive heat and flooding, including wildfire smoke and disease and insect-borne diseases and the like. We have extensive plans on that. When I think of our climate action plans, I think of our riding, and I think in particular of High Park and the coast of the lake and the need to protect it. And in many ways, our park is a microcosm of the environmental risks that we face. The park is adjacent to a bustling urban core. There are highways and train tracks crisscrossing the bottom side of it, cutting it off from the lake, cutting it off from Sunnyside. And it needs protection, and all our parks need protection. In fact, the overall environment of the province needs protection the way High Park needs it in a microcosmic way. We intend to protect at least 25% of lands and water in Ontario by 2025 and 30% by 2030. We want to create 5 new provincial parks. We're going to strengthen the Greenbelt Act. We're going to make new highways through the Greenbelt illegal ex ante. We're going to double the size of the Greenbelt and include a blue belt of protected moraines, including the Paris Gulf moraine and Carruthers Creek and the like. The other dimension of our climate action plan also connects to Parkdale and High Park, the riding, because at least 25% of the benefits of public investment to reduce climate pollution, we are going to direct to disadvantaged communities. And I'm going to ensure that that our residents and that our community really see the results of these kinds of things. We're going to focus conservation subsidies on retrofits to reduce energy use, again, in relation to primarily low income and Indigenous communities. And again, Parkdale-High Park needs a voice there. We're going to cut the annual $7 billion subsidy from taxpayers for electricity prices and push that more into climate-friendly policies. So I could go on. The one area I think that the Green Party has authority and speaks with an ethical voice is on climate change. And the reason why is because we don't see environmental protection as a line item in a budget, something that can be increased or decreased from year to year. We see the environment as the context in which budget decisions are made. And in that sense, the Green Party stands for the environment. And so that all of our policies have an environmental tone, an environmental purpose, an environmental dimension to them. They're not, the environment is just not one other pocketbook item that other parties can try to persuade us to vote in their favor for. It is the entire sort of context in which we live. And we see this with High Park. It's at the core of our riding, in the way that the environment is at the core of our lives provincially and nationally.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Next, Karim, if you could answer the same question, please.
For sure. I moved to Toronto from northern New Brunswick and other parts around 20 years ago, and clean air and climate action is actually what made me an Ontario Liberal. At the time, we were burning coal for electricity. The air was dirty. We had smog days. And when I heard Ontario Liberals talking about the prospect of a different way of closing these coal-fired plants, that was one of the motivators for me to get involved as a partisan. And sure enough, Ontario Liberals had delivered for 15 years consistently climate action, whether it was closing those coal-fired plants, bringing in carbon pricing, creating the Green Belt. The environmental legacies of those governments that I worked in and supported are significant. And it was the failure and the reversals of the government under Ford, which first started by litigating against carbon pricing, that was one of the main motivators for me to stand this time. We have a fully costed carbon reduction plan that's going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by half from 2005 levels by 2030. It's fully costed. It involves housing, electricity, transportation. A key part of our plan is our $1 a ride transit plan that's going to get hundreds of thousands of cars off the road. I'm also proud in my life as a teacher and Leadership Institute leader at Toronto Metropolitan University to have been part of a training program called Generation Climate that's reached out to tens of thousands of young people across the country to expose and share with them those climate-friendly messages based in fact and science that we need to combat climate misinformation, which is a huge challenge, remains a huge challenge. I'll echo some of what was said by Butila and Patrick in particular. The legacy of High Park, the legacy of the lake are key local priorities for me. And I would be advocating within a Liberal government for those local priorities and local legacies, really with an all-in plan on climate action at the core.
All right, thanks, Karim. But just before we move on to the third question, I just wanted to just remind just the candidates. We have Victoria Claire, who is the timekeeper, and at 20 seconds, when you have 20 seconds remaining, her yellow card will be, she'll hold up a yellow card, and when you see the red card, time's up. So we just want to be able to stick to the just the time allocations. So just as a reminder to the candidates, I know there's a lot to say, so thank you very much. We appreciate it. So for question number 3, we have families. The question is, families in our neighborhood need accessible and affordable childcare. What is your party's plan to successfully implement the Canada-wide early learning and childcare program, given the lack of licensed childcare spaces and shortage of ECE educators in Toronto? And we'll start with Patrick first. And if you could just unmute yourself.
Thank you. The Green Party wants to top classes, class sizes for kindergarten at 26 and grades 4 to 6 at 24. We want to increase ECE early childhood educators pay to at least $25 an hour. Moving up, we want to reverse the cuts to OSAP. We want to convert OSAP loans into grants. And we want to build into schools and childcare facilities a sort of progressive approach to mental health, especially in elementary schools. We want to integrate mental health institutions and supports to deal with rising mental health concerns of our kids and our youth. We also want to bring communities into the schools, and so use schools when they're vacant for community use in the summers and the like. We really want to turn the ship around in terms of childcare. We're going to push hard for its implementation. All of us are quite impatient, at least those of us with young kids are quite impatient about when it's actually going to come. And I, for one, I want to push for fully funded childcare in the future and the like. I will end early, Victoria. How's that? There you go.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Karim, the same question.
Thanks, it's a great question. And I want to honor the commitment of all the parents and all the caregivers who are in this virtual space and serving our community. Early learning and childcare is the other reason that I became an Ontario Liberal 20 years ago when I moved to this province from a province that had no publicly subsidized kindergarten of any sort. And Ontario Liberals were talking about full day kindergarten and what early learning can do to a child's development, which I now obviously see in my own kids, and I think each of us would see in our kids. This is really about 3 things. It's about subsidies, spaces, and wages. So we're committed to implementing the program rapidly, but going beyond that by giving a childcare rebate of up to $2,750 per child for fees incurred back to January, given that the Ford government was so late signing a deal, and moving quickly to have $10 a day before and after care. We have to support the professionals who do this work. And so that means increasing the ECE wage grid to starting at $23 an hour, going up to $40 an hour, and having free tuition for ECE workers. At Toronto Metropolitan University, I teach a number of care workers, and they are wondering whether this profession is worth it. And they're wondering where they will live to practice this profession. So we have to get the wages up, and we have to have a comprehensive plan so that the people who care for people in our community can actually live in our community. And that's a challenge that is going in the wrong direction right now under this government. Further, we have to have the spaces that are created, and we have an aggressive plan both in the school system and outside the school system to support not-for-profit and public childcare. This is an incredibly important commitment to all the parents here. The frustrations of parents over the last few years have boiled over, and it's well time for action. I and Ontario Liberals are committed to some of this very rapid action.
Okay, thank you, Karim. Butila?
Yes, thank you. I worked really hard to push the Ford government and get Ontario to sign the $10 a day childcare. It happened at the 11th hour, but phew, it was such a relief because it was signed just days before the end of the fiscal year, March 31st, when Ontario risked losing over $1 billion in funding. Now that the deal has been signed, the hard work of implementation begins, and that's really where the focus needs to be: implementing the program, creating the spaces, and to fix the staffing crisis. I'm going to actually request my colleague Karim to urge, his own leader to please rethink the position to renegotiate the childcare deal. Ontario just signed it. We were the last province to do so. And the program is already being implemented in provinces across Canada. We cannot afford any more delays, because more delays would mean families continuing to pay mortgage-sized payments and childcare fees, and harder for parents, mostly moms, to get back to their works and careers. We know that there is going to be an increase in demand. So, long wait lists is going to be the next bottleneck, and families not being able to access the affordable childcare spaces. Experts are saying we need 150,000 new spaces just to keep up with the demand. We only have 20,000 in progress, so we're ways behind. The NDP, we are committed to working with municipalities who do the delivery of childcare to expand the not-for-profit public spaces. And, but of course, we cannot create spots or have the childcare system without the workers. The workers are the system. And childcare workers are mostly women who have been overworked and underpaid for far too long. So we are proposing a wage floor of $25 an hour for registered ECEs and $20 an hour for all of the childcare program staff. And to work with the childcare sector together with the coalition to build a wage grid and decent working standards that includes benefits and support the childcare workers to upgrade their qualification. This will go a really, really long way in recruiting and retaining staff, because one of the big reasons why staff are leaving in droves is because of poor working conditions. We will ensure that all workers will have access to 10 permanent paid sick days. ECEs, childcare staff, they protect our littlest ones.
Okay, I'm sorry to cut you off, Butila. We're just trying to run out of time. My apologies.
That's okay.
Okay. Next, so our next question that we'll be going to is with regards to schools. And the question is, the infrastructure deficit in schools needs to be addressed. More investments are needed to support children, parents, caregivers, educators, and support staff. What are your party's policies to address the backlog in school infrastructure, both with aging facilities and the implementation of new public health concerns? The next part is, how does your party plan to support the teachers, early ECEs, educational assistants, and others in the education field? And how does your party plan to support families in the care and education of their children? And we'll start with Karim on this one.
Thank you. Incredibly important question. Public education is at the heart, I believe, of a number of what maybe perhaps a number of political parties and perhaps the personal drive definitely of me. And to see this government cynically cut public education and cynically have a really move in a lot of ways towards the privatization of public education, or trying to push people out of the public system through neglect or worse, is an appalling state of affairs that is really a motivator for me, and I'm sure the other candidates who have joined us today, as we see what's happening in the 29 publicly funded schools in our riding. So we have an aggressive plan on each of these points. We're going to have a historic $10 billion investment in schools that we want to pay for by canceling the 413 highway that Butila mentioned earlier, including ventilation, getting those facilities up to standards. I've heard so many stories canvassing the riding around and speaking to the leaders of Fix Our Schools and other groups, parent councils around what's happening in the schools that we haven't been able to go inside as members of the public or as parents for 2 years. It's urgent, and we'll do that with a priority to hopefully clear the school backlog, repair backlog within 5 years. In the classroom experience and with teachers and students, we think we need to reinvest in that too, to hire the workers, to bring back the workers, whether it's teachers, mental health professionals, or special ed workers, to have those students, those staff, those teachers, those parents feel supported. And we do that with a class size cap of 20 at all grades, hiring enough special ed and mental health professionals, ending online learning, creating an optional grade 13 for students who have lost so much. And I think more generally, it's important for all candidates, and I'm glad I think 2 candidates here would agree with me on this, to be on the side of parents vocally during such a time of crisis and their kids. And so those are some of the things I come at this question at as a local parent and through the Ontario Liberal platform and as an educator myself.
Thank you, Kareem. Butila?
Yes, thank you. So the state of disrepair in our schools has been a major concern for a very long time. It's ballooned over successive governments and now reached $16.8 billion in terms of the investments that are needed. In our plan, we have committed to investing the money to fix our schools and to clear the entire backlog within 10 years. It actually goes hand in hand with our climate plan, where we prioritize upgrading public school buildings to not only ensure that they're safe places to learn, but they have proper ventilation. The buildings are climate resilient and carbon neutral. We want to allow the TDSB to collect education development charges from developers and use it towards fixing our schools, which right now all boards are allowed to do except the TDSB because of some archaic regulation that no government bothered to change in the last 20 years, despite pleas from the TDSB, the NDP, education workers and families. To support education staff and to maintain staffing levels, we will reverse the cuts that have been made by Ford and hire 20,000 teachers and education workers so that class sizes are smaller. We also want to repeal Bill 124, which is keeping wages of staff like educational assistants way below inflation. We need to increase and have committed to increasing special education funding that has been neglected for far too long. Parents are having to fight so hard just to get their child a part-time EA, and some of them go very long time without it. We know that this is crucial to both the teacher and the students. We also want to ensure there are more mental health care workers, child and youth workers within the education system. Students have really had their learning disrupted and suffered along during the pandemic. I know that as a mom of 2 kids, it was so hard. So we really need to make the real investments that are needed in the education system. And finally, the root of the problem in our education system is that the per student funding has continued to decline in the last 20 years, and the funding formula is outdated. So we have committed to fixing the funding formula together with parents, education workers, and we really, really need to get this fixed. Otherwise, education funding will never be fixed. And finally, I just want to say, I'm proud to be the candidate endorsed by elementary teachers and secondary school teachers for my work.
Okay, thank you, Butila. Sorry, we're at time. Patrick? Sorry, Patrick, could you please unmute yourself?
In terms of aging infrastructure in schools, the Green Party is committed to spending $900 million each year for the next 4 years to upgrade. And like Butila, I'd like to, as a representative of High Park and Parkdale and the riding, I'd really like to push developers, not only larger developers, not only in our riding, but adjacent to our riding, especially in the downtown core, to include community benefits from their development proposals that extend beyond the jurisdiction in which they're occurring. So the downtown core gets a lot of community benefits from the towers that get constructed. And most of those community benefits stay downtown. So for example, they built an echo bridge somewhere downtown. I'm sure it brings much needed green space to the downtown core, but an echo bridge over the Gardner from High Park to Sunnyside would be a much better investment. Now imagine an entire echo bridge that covers the Gardiner, linking the lake up to the park. But I want to spend some time though talking about families and children and parents. And I think this was sparked by Kareem's and Butila's comment about the fact that we're parents. When my child, I have 4 kids, when my child was 14, he transitioned and it did not go well. And I can tell you that the experience that he had of transitioning was that he felt like an outcast and he didn't belong to society. And I don't know how to put the words in it properly, but he turned to drugs and he became a meth addict at 14 and he's still in rehab. And so we let him down and we're still trying to figure out how, but our community let him down too. He was buying drugs on Roncesvalles. And it's not just our community, our institutions let him down. And he's been taking 2 years to try and climb back out of this. He's doing well, but I know what challenges are out there for our youth and for our kids. And they're not like when we grew up, I tell you that. They're a lot scarier and they're a lot more precarious and they're a lot more dangerous. My son OD'd 3 times and we were afraid he was going to die. And we were just lucky that he wasn't. And we need more supports for that. We need more supports in our schools. We need to turn our schools into community centers in the summer so that there are connections for our kids in the summertime with the community. And we need just to take much more care of them and have the policies that really deliver on that.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Patrick. So we now have the next question that we have is about sustainable investment. And we need more investment in sustainable low carbon transportation, including cycling, transit, infrastructure, and electric vehicle infrastructure. What policies does your party propose to support this important public infrastructure? And Butila, we'll start with you.
Yes, thank you. So a low carbon transportation option that has been severely neglected is our transit system, the TTC. We want to ensure that more people use public transit and that public transit services are reliable. The province used to cover 50% of the operating costs, but Mike Harris downloaded it, and then successive governments never bothered to upload it back, despite the growth in our city's population, the growing maintenance costs of our TTC, leaving the city to try and cover all of the costs through fare increases. So the NDP has a long push, and it's in our platform to take back 50% of the responsibility of the operating costs, and this will immediately improve the services and make transit much more affordable, therefore encouraging its uptake. We're also proposing the Complete Streets Infrastructure Fund, which is a provincial infrastructure funding to help municipalities build complete streets that will encourage active transportation, to make streets safer for pedestrians, cyclists, and create good jobs on the as well. The city wants to do this, but there's no funding from the province. And this will make our roads safer for everybody. Kids walking to school, seniors crossing the street, cyclists will have dedicated bike lanes. We're proposing a cycling strategy to expand and connect Toronto's cycling network and make it an even safer option for getting around. We certainly are encouraging electric vehicles over gas. So we're proposing incentive programs, rebate programs to incentivize, including for e-bikes, which promotes bike use, requires way less parking space, still has the range, and is way more affordable in terms of an option over cars. As more and more people switch to EVs, we're going to need to build EV charging stations to keep up with the demand. So we're also proposing that as part of our Green New Democratic deal for climate action, we start to do that work immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Butila. Patrick? And just please unmute your mic, Patrick.
I can assure you that the Green Party is good to go in terms of electric vehicles and electrification of our transportation system. I won't run through the details on them, but we want to cut public transit fares in half as a trial pilot project for an initial period of 3 months. one policy that actually hurts me, is quite painful personally, is that we want to eliminate 150,000 worst polluting vehicles off the road. I drive a 1984 classic Ford F-100 pickup that is dear to my heart, but I'm happy to pay extra gas. And I think most Ontarians were definitely concerned about inflation and gas prices. But some of the gas prices, the increases have gone up because of the war. And I would think that all of us would be willing to pay a premium to support Ukrainians with higher gas prices if we knew where that increase was going to. It turns out that the oil and gas companies are making a lot of money off this inflationary dimension to our gas supply. And governments are raking in taxes too. I think we need to start allocating that more effectively. We are going to upload 50% of the costs from municipalities back to the province. We're going to fund the train service to the north. We're going to put in all sorts of incentives for electric vehicles and electric scooters. This is probably only the one retail politics item or pocketbook item that the Green Party is offering. The rest of our policies, if you reflect on them, they are structural. They are changing the environment in which we work. They are changing the environment in which we go to school, our kids go to school. They're not items that make you feel that a political party is balancing your checkbook every month and telling you how to budget certain things month to month. These are structural changes that are badly needed, including electrification and eliminating our reliance on fossil fuels.
Thank you, Patrick. Kareem?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe start by, pardon me, paying tribute to Patrick for his revelation to us just now. And Butila has shared her own experiences as a mom, and the personal side of being a candidate, being a serving politician, is something that I hope that you get from this experience. As for me, my personal story as it relates to transportation is perhaps a little less about challenge and beauty, but it is about romance. When I first moved to Toronto, it was the TTC that connected me to my girlfriend, who lived quite a different part of town, and that resulted in the family we have today. And it was sustainable transportation that at its most beautiful is something that unifies our riding, and is something that we need to preserve, protect, and enhance. And so we have great bones, like many things in our community, like with many of these questions, we have great bones. We need to support and build those bones. We need to have the incentives. We need to have the policies. With me and with Ontario Liberals, you'll get, as I mentioned earlier, $1 a ride transit for 2 years. You'll be getting real incentives in electric bikes. Our incentive is $500 an electric bike, and other bike infrastructure, including the bike infrastructure that we currently enjoy in the riding, partially paid for by the work that I helped with in the Premier's office earlier. The province had its first cycling plan. You'll also see me biking around the riding pretty regularly, maybe a bit squeaky, but as part of our attempts to make this a low carbon campaign. And more generally, the kinds of investments, whether it's in the Up Express, other forms of low carbon transportation, electric vehicle purchases, all of those pieces come together to, I think, make transportation something that we can be joyous about, something that can be proud to be taking, rather than something that is contributing to some of the worst challenges in our planet. And I hope that you'll see in our plan, and you'll see in me an attempt to do that.
Okay, thank you, Kareem. Question number 6 that we have. COVID has thrown the shortcomings of our healthcare system into sharp relief. Healthcare workers are burnt out and leaving the field. How do you plan to support nurses and PSWs to ensure their continued participation and encourage growth in healthcare? And we'll start with Patrick.
The Green Party wants to increase base operating funding for hospitals by at least 5% year to year to improve the infrastructure in which our healthcare workers work. We want to increase the salaries of nurses. We're going to hire 15,000 new nurses. We're going to expand and deliver family health teams into all communities. We are going to increase funding for public health and pandemic preparedness. We're going to provide the support for frontline workers, our nurses and our healthcare workers that they didn't have and that they do need to have in the future. And we're not only going to learn from our lessons in the past, we need to anticipate unexpected challenges, unexpected eruptions in our environment, in our economy, in peace. And we need to support our basic healthcare institutions against shocks, such as the shock that we've seen in the past.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Kareem?
What we've seen with the pandemic and what we've seen for far too long is healthcare workers and patients having to be the advocates. I got into politics, or I got interested in politics decades ago, thanks to the experience my parents had as immigrant physicians serving in our community. Knowing what they wanted to do at the bedside wasn't being supported by the system, and that really inspired me to be part of system change at the political level. And so that's what we need to do. We need to be there for our care workers and for our patients, so they don't have to be the voices without support, without help. This is urgent work. The care economy in general is really being challenged right now because we've capped class sizes, because we've capped wages through Bill 124, because we've artificially kept the system just at its breaking point. Clearly a learning from the pandemic is around the need for flex capacity in the system. There's so many learnings from this pandemic. There's so many learnings that I've had in the last couple of years teaching nursing students and PSW students at Toronto Metropolitan University, hearing that they get, based on what they've seen, they're already thinking about leaving the profession. This is a morally unacceptable position, given the investment that we have in them and given how much we owe care workers of any kind. So we have a plan to, again, increase the minimum wages for PSWs, reverse the planned cuts for public health units, reinvest in home care, give families the support that they need. And this is an area for learning for me. When I worked in the Ontario Liberal government, we did a lot in this space, but there's a learning that we need to do even more. And I'm glad that our party has taken that seriously with some of the proposals that you'll see in front of you today.
Thank you, Kareem. Butila?
Thanks. The pandemic completely exposed how broken our healthcare system is really. I mean, chronic shortage of staff who are run off their feet, unable to give patients the time or the attention that they need. And yes, healthcare is critical. It's one of the key responsibilities of government. And yet healthcare has faced cuts year after year, and it has weakened our healthcare system, the cuts. And we have seen user fees and privatization creep up instead. Ford cut public health units from 35 to 10. He brought in Bill 124, which capped wages of frontline healthcare workers way below inflation. And he even refused to spend the money that was needed in our healthcare system during the pandemic. I mean, no wonder our healthcare system doesn't have the capacity to deal with surges. But really, this has been decades in the making. If you recall, last election, hallway healthcare was a key issue. Patients being literally in the hallways. Just last week, I spoke to a healthcare worker who told me her own father was put in a bed inside a bathroom of a hospital. When I first got elected, I did a tour of St. Joseph's Hospital, and I saw firsthand how overcrowded the hallways of our hospital was, of our local hospital. And unfortunately, and you know, this has been years in the making. Under the Liberals, Ontario had the lowest per capita spending in healthcare in the country. 1,600 nurses were fired when we already had a staffing shortage. And of course, Ford just made it worse. I was proud, together with the Ontario Nurses Association, on behalf of the NDP, to announce that on day one of being elected, we would repeal Bill 124. In terms of PSWs, we're proposing an immediate increase of $5 an hour to their wages and have full-time jobs with benefits, not the current pattern of, stitching up multiple part-time jobs through temp agencies. All workers should and will have paid sick days, 10 permanent paid sick days. It's actually quite unbelievable that healthcare workers don't have paid sick days. We're going to immediately hire 30,000 nurses. This is the number that experts say that we need. It's part of our plan to address the surgical backlog. We want to expedite nursing credentials for internationally trained health professionals. We want to improve primary care and
Sorry,
expand community.
Batilla, you're at time. Sorry.
More primary family doctors to lessen the burden.
Okay, but sorry, Batilla, you're at time. We have to move on. I'm sorry, we have to move on to the last question. Our last question is about just development within the development that occurs in our community. Development has become a key concern of residents. While we understand development is necessary, we believe in the thoughtful development of our community. So what changes would your party make to the Ontario Land Tribunal to ensure that communities like ours would be meaningfully engaged in the development process? And what is your party's position on the use of the ministerial zoning orders? What will your party do to control the use of them in the future? And we'll start with Karim.
Thanks for this, such an important question. And I've been at the table for many of these discussions in my service as Director of Policy to two premiers. When I was in the Wynne government, we brought in a proposal to, well, we did bring in a reform to the old OMB, which created the option for a City of Toronto specific land dispute system, which we thought was important given the very particular needs in Toronto. Unfortunately, that never went ahead by the city, and the Ford government brought in its very developer-friendly OLT. We believe strongly that we need to rebalance the system and rebalance the way that the process works to make it fair to have community voice. When it comes to MZOs, again, I've been at the table for MZOs. These are now being given out like candy, it seems like, by the Ford government, to an extent that municipalities aren't even doing planning anymore. They're just assuming that they'll get an MZO. This is wrong, and we want to stop it. So we'll scrap MZOs and create a new rules-based measure to limit anything like this to really critical projects and focus on what the question is implying: the need for local consultation, the need for engagement with Indigenous communities, and others, so that we have fairer development. Right now, the imbalance is abhorrent, and it's leading to the wrong kind of development, not only in our community, but across Southern Ontario, and it needs to stop.
Okay, thank you, Karim. Batilla?
Thank you. In our community, we remember how problematic the OMB was under the Liberals, and really, it was such a huge community effort to push and get some reform. Unfortunately, the reforms came so last minute that the city was unable to implement it, and then Ford got elected. It came far, far too late. And then under Ford, we ended up having the Ontario Lands Tribunal, which is pretty much an OMB, like a mega OMB, which sidelines professional expertise of environment, of heritage conservation, and it further tilts the plannings and the appeal process towards the interests of large developers. So the NDP in our platform, and we have said repeatedly that we will reform the Ontario Lands Tribunal to ensure that planning decisions will respect provincial planning laws, sustainable land use policies, good planning policies, and it has to be and we want to make sure that any kind of reform that happens to the planning system, it's fair, it's transparent, it serves public interest and not private interest. That is really, really important, because we cannot allow private interests impede on legitimate municipal decisions. The NDP, we strongly believe in meaningful community consultation that is necessary to grow into the neighborhoods that we want to see, right? We want to have developments where there's 2-3 size bedrooms that includes deeply affordable units, that has green spaces built into it. And we also want to make sure that developers have a responsibility in the communities that they build in. With regards to MZOs, absolutely, they're a sledgehammer approach to planning. The NDP has repeatedly said, and we're committed to scrapping, even repealing some of the MZOs that are already issued that harm environment or the public interest. And the thing is, right now, the MZO is being used for the benefit of developer friends, really, and totally steamrolling over local consultation process. And all of this is happening because Ford passed a law, Bill 257, that pretty much allowed MZOs to ignore provincial planning statement and use for planning. So we are going to scrap and repeal Bill 257 that allows the province to do this.
Thank you, Batila. Patrick?
With respect to development and planning, what I'd like to see is Parkdale-High Park take back total control over development in our riding. And in fact, the community have a veto over any kind of development that the community really doesn't deem appropriate. I'm done with getting the odd parquet thrown in the neighborhood as a result of some high rise going up down the street. We have a lot more bargaining power and we got to use it for the right reasons. So regardless of what level of government various decisions reside in, the level of government I want planning and development to reside in is in the residents of our riding. The MZOs, the MZOs have been used by Rob Ford primarily, most dramatically, in relation to the proposed construction of Highway 413. He has used MZOs to reroute the planned route of the highway away from developers who have golf courses in its way and through lands that form part of the Greenbelt. There are 8 most powerful developers in Ontario own 3,000 acres of land that is destined to be expropriated by the Ford government. They bought it for pennies and they're going to sell it for millions and millions of dollars. They are deeply connected to the Ford campaign. Ex-Ford officials, ex-government officials, PC officials have been working as lobbyists. They've been contributing up to $800,000 to the Ford campaign. And at some point, we have to ask ourselves whether or not the Ford government is acting in the public interest or whether or not private interests are affecting his judgment. There is a criminal code provision which addresses breach of public trust, and it holds elected officials to a high standard in exercising the powers that we vest in them. And I call on the relevant authorities to launch an investigation into whether Doug Ford's dealings with developers in relation to Highway 413 is in violation of the criminal code of public trust in section 122 of the criminal code. It's time we stop this backwater politics, this slush fund. That's
Sorry, Patrick. Sorry, Patrick, I'm going to have to stop you there. You're at time. Thank you. So I just wanted to thank the candidates for answering the sort of the pre-selected questions. We really appreciate all the thought that was put into your responses. I know there was they were quite fulsome, and there was a lot to respond to, so thank you. We do have some questions from we have quite a few questions actually from attendees. So I just wanted to let all the attendees know, thank you for your questions and for your comments that you've put in our chat. Thank you for the comments, and we will be focusing on questions for the candidates. We will be adding the comments into the transcripts, so they will be part of the record of this meeting, but we will be focusing on questions that have been posed. Okay, so one of the first questions that we have, it's just a general question to all the candidates. do you have a plan to deal with the backlogs at the landlord and tenant board? And we'll start with Butila, and this is going to be just a minute that each of the candidates will have to respond to these questions. Butila?
Yes. So one of the reasons why we're seeing a massive backlog in the landlord and tenant board tribunal is because the Ford government has not hired and replaced adjudicators to oversee the hearings. And so we have been saying that this is, you know, this is part of the tactic, I think, you know, where they delay the processes by very long periods of time, and then you know, basically say this is not a system that's working anymore, and bring in changes to the landlord and tenant board to tilt again the board in a way that would favor the big corporate landlords, that we see who are evicting tenants, who we saw that were having, you know, evicting tenants during the pandemic in minutes over online Zoom. So we really want to ensure that our tribunal systems are well resourced, and that is going to address the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Butila. Same question for Patrick. Do you have a plan to deal with the backlogs at the landlord and tenant board?
We do, and I have a similar answer as Butila. That is, we intend to increase funding to the board and hire many more adjudicators to clear up the backlog.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And Karim?
Yeah, we have a plan to invest $15 million specifically in helping to clear the backlog, and also to look at those repeat scofflaw landlords and increase the penalties on them. We believe that we need to rebalance the system to be more in the interests of tenants. And again, having observed the online meetings of the last couple of years, that these are heavily skewed against often racialized people whose first language is not English processes. And we need to address that, as well as dealing with the backlog.
Thank you, Karim. The next question we have, what is your party's position on the control of utilities? Should they be public or private, or private corporations? And we'll start with Patrick, please.
One of the distinctive features about the Green Party is that the Green Party is in favor of markets when they work, and not in favor of markets when they don't work. We don't have a default presumption in favor of markets the way the Progressive Conservative Party does, and we don't have a default position against markets the way the NDP has. Markets are useful instruments for delivering public goods when they work, and when they don't work, then we need to figure out different kinds of ways of delivering. I really don't want to talk in detail about nationalization of our of various important sectors of the economy, other than to leave that idea with you that the Green Party has a certain flexibility when it comes to policy choice and policy formation, and markets are a useful part of that. We are seeing, though, that in the energy sector and the electricity sector, that they need some help.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Karim?
Maybe I'll just pack up on one of Patrick's points, because one place where I think Liberals would have not have typically decided to intervene, but we believe that a public corporation is necessary, is in the home building and home capitalization space. So there specifically, we've proposed an Ontario Home Building Corporation. I believe Butila mentioned a similar commitment by the NDP. So we believe, and I've been at the table for some of these discussions, that utilities need to be well regulated, and there needs to be a consumer voice. And sometimes that has been let languish a little bit. We don't have any specific commitments in our manifesto around any of the electricity utilities, except to note that we think setting policy is really important. And so if we have a policy intent to get the carbon emissions down by half to meet our Paris commitments. There's an important role for the utilities sector in that, and we'll be working aggressively with them to make sure that they're part of that solution.
Okay, thank you, Karim. Butila?
Utilities, things that people cannot live without, should be in public hands. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely unaffordable for people. It's going to lead to people not having proper access to basic utilities, which is why the NDP was vehemently against the privatization of Hydro One under the previous Liberal government. As well, public ownership is not only the best shot at reducing bills and making utilities affordable, it is also the best shot in ways we can actually take and improve climate action. What happened after we sold Hydro One and got privatized? They invested money and bought a coal-fired plant, completely going backwards. And so now Ontario has, as part of Hydro One, owns a coal-fired plant. How does this make sense at all? Public utilities in the hands of public ownership. Simple. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Butila. Our next questions, we've had a couple of questions here related to just COVID, and also how the vulnerable people in our communities are going to be taken care of. So we have these next two questions are sort of related. There's after COVID, it is very clear that older people and people with dementia are not a priority, but need investment. How will they be supported by yourself and your party? And associate sort of another question that's related deals with people on disability, and that they receive less than $2,000 to live on. And what will your party do to correct the disparity of this? And I think both of these questions, if you can comment on that, that would be great. And I think we're starting with, I've got my order all wrong. Sorry, I think it's Karim that we're starting with. Is that right?
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
I heard so many stories in the last couple of years teaching my Toronto Metropolitan University students, and more recently campaigning about the deterioration of so many members of our community during the pandemic who had dementia. Part of this is institutional and systemic, based on the way we have been giving care inadequately through corporate large warehouse long-term care facilities that have the bottom line in mind rather than caregiving. So we have a very significant aggressive commitment to end that responsibly over an 8-year period as part of our fully costed plan. We also, more specifically to dementia, we have a specific plan to create a dementia care network and invest in the kinds of supports that families and caregivers who are assisting family members with dementia might need. With respect to income support and ODSP, we have a specific commitment to increase ODSP by 10 percentage points per year over 2 years. We know how challenging that will remain. So we have other supports in our plan, other cost of living supports, whether it's around creating more deeply affordable housing and supporting lower public transit costs and lower childcare costs. But I understand deeply, I've been at the table for some of those discussions, and these are deeply difficult questions that I will be an advocate on in the community.
Thank you, Karim. Butila?
Thank you. First, on senior care. Majority of the seniors prefer to age at home, and that's what we need to enable. Home care is going to be really, really important. Now, it is likely that there will be seniors who will need long-term care, but we want to build not institution-like settings, but small homes where it actually feels like home. And of course, care is delivered by the PSWs and by registered practical nurses and other staff, dietary staff. We want to ensure that all of them have decent wages, paid sick days, benefits, so that they're working full-time permanent jobs, so they actually have the time to give care and create that bond with the senior. We have specifically taken recommendations from the Jill's inquiry to say that PSW should also upgrade into geriatric geriatric care, into palliative care, into their training so that they're able to better care for seniors with dementia. With regards to ODSP, we want to increase it immediately by 20%, but that's just immediate, and make many other changes such as ending clawbacks, getting rid of very odd archaic rules like saying you can't be married, you can't live together with a partner. These are just first steps. We want to completely restructure social support so that no one lives in poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Butila. And Patrick?
The Green Party is going to completely restructure social support, at least with respect to those with disabilities. We're going to double the Ontario disability benefit immediately. The Ford government has recently announced that it's going to increase marginally the disability benefit, and this means a lot to our riding. There are a lot of constituents and residents here who are disabled and who receive disability benefits and can't afford to live on them. And Rob Ford's increasing the benefit, not because he really wants you to have it. He just wants your vote. So we're committed to that in terms of disability and senior care. I don't have time to go through the policies, but we do have wraparound support for seniors and extended funding enhancements for old age homes. And we want to republish it. Here's where markets don't work, and that is in senior care and private care for seniors. They simply don't work. 60% of senior care is homes are run by private institutions, and that's where the most of the deaths occurred. So we need to reverse that trend of privatization.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Patrick. We have time for just one more question. So this last question is relates to the Ontario Building Code. The Ontario Building Code requires every bedroom to have a window for daylight and ventilation, but developers have been exploiting a loophole to build condos with windowless bedrooms for 20 years, leaving a generation of kids to grow up in dark spaces with poor ventilation. Would you push to close the loophole? And we'll start with Butila.
Absolutely. There needs to be major reforms within the Ontarian corporations. We need to have major reforms in terms of how condos are not only built, but the standards they are built in. Windowless bedrooms are not just the only thing. There are way too many problems. It's a sector that has been ignored. It's kind of like Wild Wild West, if you think about it. You've seen stories in the media. So condo management, condo oversight has to be taken seriously, because increasingly more and more people live in condos. In our platform, we have proposed changes to the Condo Act, and really trying to ensure that people in condos have rights, because under the current system, condo residents have very limited rights. Thank you.
Thanks, Butila. Patrick?
Yes, we would close the loophole.
Okay, thank you. And Karim?
I've actually lived in that particular situation, so I know exactly where this question is coming from. And so we have a strong commitment to really considerably change and upgrade the Ontario Building Code for a number of measures, and I would definitely advocate for that specific one that's in there.
All right, thank you. Thank you to all three of our candidates, to Karim, Butila, and Patrick. Thank you to all the attendees. I know there are lots of questions here that we haven't been able to get to, but I'm just going to give each of the candidates just 1 minute just to sort of provide just some closing remarks, and we'll start with Patrick.
So thank you again for organizing this event and listening to us. And I hope all of us are able to convey what our parties stand for and what we want to do in the riding. I've really enjoyed campaigning. I love walking around and talking to people. What I hear the most is, oh, the Green Party, you hug trees and you love the whales. I don't know about you, but hugging a tree is kind of awkward. I tried it about a month ago, and it just didn't feel very well. And we don't have very many whales in Ontario. I suppose there's some in James Bay. But let me say this, if there were whales in Lake Ontario, I'd probably love those whales. And in fact, I'm purposely bringing out the inner green in you, because who wouldn't love whales in Lake Ontario? But we've changed. The Green Party has changed. And I hope that my message to you is conveyed that we're ready to govern. The entities that haven't changed are the established parties. They're top down. They don't have flexibility. They're fighting old battles. The NDP has had 4 kicks at the can. If the Liberals were so great on climate change, that we wouldn't be facing the climate that we're living in right now. So I wouldn't want to bank too much on past experience with the Liberal Party.
Okay, sorry, I'm sorry to cut you off, Patrick. But,
No problem.
Okay, all right, thank you. Karim?
Thanks so much to all of you for, and to Patrick and Butila for joining in this conversation tonight. It's unfortunate that the PCs chose not to attend this. I think you've heard in different ways our perspectives on the PC government. And the question is, what kind of change do people want? What kind of change can be delivered? I bring my experience as a teacher, father in the community, experienced policy leader and journalist who's been at these tables, who's helping champion and has helped develop a fully costed practical plan to deal with some of the challenges in front of us, while also recognizing that government is complex, that we have a lot of healing and repair work to do. And in me, you will get someone who has an appreciation for that complexity, someone who will listen attentively, bring some humility to the process, and be active at the table, desiring that the entire riding, the entire community have a seat at the table to start the healing and repair. I look forward to meeting you at the doors if I haven't already, and I appreciate your attendance tonight.
Thank you, Karim. And Butila?
I also want to thank my colleagues and also to Junction Residents Association for hosting this. This is such an important part of our democratic process, and I'm happy to have been here to answer questions and share the NDP's platform. The question I get asked is, Butila, why are you in politics? Why are you running to be reelected as the MPP? And I always say it's because I really love our community. I am where I am today because of our community's love and support when my family moved to Canada. And it has always been my driving force. And it is also why I fight so hard for our community. I want to send this message that our governments should be working for us. People shouldn't have to beg for help. People shouldn't be sick and tired of asking the government to do the right thing. People shouldn't have to fight their own government. And it's really not too much to ask that public dollars go into public services that people need and not to private profit. I really believe that a better future is possible. Let's build that better future instead of creating more problems for the next generation. So that is what drives me. I love our community. I fight hard, I work hard, and I hope that I will gain your confidence once again to represent you as the MPP for Parkdale-High Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Butila. I just wanted to thank all of the candidates again, to Karim, Butila, and Patrick, for coming out this evening and answering our questions from our community, and just for taking part in tonight's Meet the Candidates event. I want to thank on the behalf of the JRA, to thank all of the attendees. I know it's a long day after work and children and all sorts of things, and it's probably not done yet. So thank you very much for coming out and for listening to our questions, to listening to our candidates, and for participating and for being so engaged. And just to thank the JRA, to Victoria Clare, Helen Vasilakos, and Sue Fleming for helping to organize and host this. Really, I think it's gone really well. We will be posting the transcript and the recording on the JRA website. So just wanted to say thank you to everyone. We hope you have a good evening, and stay in touch. We'll keep you informed on whenever our next event is going to be. So thank you again. And on June 2nd, please get out and vote. Thank you very much, and good evening and good night.
Night.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahima, for moderating.
Good night. Thank you.
Have a good
Okay.
night.
Good
Gotta put
night.
the kids to bed now. Bye.